Hi, I'm Olivia Mercer. My life had always been tied to the sound of construction, the rhythmic pounding of hammers, the low hum of power tools, the scent of fresh cut wood. My father owned Mercer & Co. Construction, a business that was more than just a company to me. It was the heart of our family's name. I wasn't just an observer, I was his shadow. I learned the trade from the ground up, reading blueprints at 17, negotiating deals by 20. I believed every word. When he said one day it would all be mine, that promise became my purpose. I gave up opportunities most people dream of. While my friends went off to universities or traveled the world, I stayed behind to keep the business running. I worked weekends, holidays, and sometimes 18-hour days, chasing deadlines and saving deals that would have otherwise fallen through. When times got tough, I was the one making sacrifices, turning down vacations, skipping family gatherings outside of work because there was always another project, another client to secure. My father's praise was rare, but I didn't need much. I thought his trust was enough. Christmas Eve should have been a night of warmth, laughter, and family. The table was set with golden cutlery and candles flickering softly. My stepmother had draped the room in garlands and twinkling lights, while holiday music played faintly in the background. The air was rich with the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon. For once, I thought we might have a night free from business talk, a moment to simply exist as a family. I didn't know that before the night was over, my world would fracture beyond repair. It happened so suddenly, so casually, that I almost thought I'd misheard him. My father tapped his wine glass, his voice cutting through the hum of conversation. "We've decided to sell the business," he said. I froze, the words hitting me like a cold wind. But before I could process it, his gaze met mine. "And Olivia, you're getting nothing." The room went still. Even the music felt quieter, like the entire house was holding its breath, waiting for me to react. My stepmother's lips curved in a faint smile, one she didn't bother to hide. My younger half-brother kept his eyes fixed on his plate, but I caught the flicker of satisfaction in his posture. My fork rested uselessly on my plate, my hand trembling. In that moment, every sacrifice I'd made, every late night and early morning, every piece of myself I'd poured into the company, it all turned to ash. The lights above seemed too bright, almost cruel, illuminating my humiliation for everyone to see. I wanted to speak, to demand an explanation, but my throat tightened. Around me, the others carried on awkwardly, murmuring about anything but the bomb my father had just dropped. My glass of wine sat untouched, my food cooling as the reality settled in. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was an execution. My future, the one I had built brick by brick alongside him, had been stolen in front of a holiday audience, and he had delivered the final blow with a calm, practiced cruelty that told me this wasn't a decision made in haste, it was planned. The days after that night felt like walking through thick fog, every step heavy with disbelief. I replayed the moment over and over, the tap of his glass, the smirk in my stepmother's eyes, the finality in his voice. Friends texted, their messages dripping with awkward sympathy. Some coworkers avoided me entirely, their silence saying more than words ever could. I couldn't escape the whispers. Even in the grocery store, I felt eyes on me. My father didn't reach out. No explanation, no apology, just the deafening quiet that made it clear he didn't see me as his daughter anymore. Just another loose end to cut. One morning, I gathered the courage to confront him at the office. My hands were trembling, but my voice carried the weight of years of loyalty. "You told me it would be mine," I said, my heart pounding. He didn't look up from his desk. "Things change," he replied, flipping through papers as if I wasn't even standing there. That was it, no reason, no compassion, just 3 words that erased more than a decade of sacrifice. His dismissal hit harder than the announcement itself, because it showed me he never intended to make it right. I left that office without another word, my eyes burning but my pride intact. Back at home, I packed what little I could call mine, a few boxes of clothes, old photographs, and the tools I'd bought with my own money for work. My stepmother watched from the doorway, her arms crossed, a faint satisfaction lingering in her gaze. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I moved into a cramped apartment above a laundromat, where the constant hum of machines replaced the steady rhythm of construction that had once been my life's soundtrack. Nights were the worst. I would lie awake staring at the cracked ceiling, the shadows from the streetlights dancing across peeling paint. Every memory felt like a blade. The summers I skipped vacations, the winters I spent on freezing job sites, the birthdays I missed because the company needs you, Olivia. I had lived for his approval, for the promise that all of it meant something. Now, that promise was gone, and I had nothing to show for the years I had given him except calloused hands and a hollow chest. The betrayal was a wound that didn't stop bleeding. In the quiet, the truth began to settle in. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It had been planned, calculated, and carried out with precision. My father had chosen this moment, a family holiday, because it was the one place I wouldn't fight back. He wanted me humiliated, broken, and stripped of power. It wasn't just business to him. It was personal. The realization twisted in my gut, replacing grief with something darker, sharper. I didn't cry anymore. I couldn't. The tears had burned away, leaving only steel in their place. I started to notice the smallest details, the cracks in his world, a missed call from a supplier, a late payment to a contractor, whispers in the community about his changing priorities. My mind began to piece together patterns, threads of weakness in the empire he'd built. Every time I thought about how easily he had erased me from the future, that steel inside me hardened. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I wasn't going to stay broken. I was going to make him regret it. Revenge didn't come to me in an instant. It grew slowly, feeding on every sleepless night, every humiliating memory of that Christmas Eve. I knew charging in blindly would only give him another chance to crush me. Instead, I began to watch, to listen. My father had always been meticulous, but since the sale announcement, his attention had shifted. He was chasing bigger deals, courting corporate buyers with no regard for loyalty or the community. That shift left gaps I could exploit. I started making mental notes, memorizing details, and quietly reaching out to people who still believed in me. The buyer was a large, faceless corporation with a reputation for bleeding companies dry before abandoning them. I knew they didn't care about the employees or the decades of relationships Mercer & Co. had built, but what I discovered over late-night research sessions was far more valuable. They had a history of cutting legal corners, hiding safety violations, and using shell companies to cover questionable transactions. My father's arrogance had led him to trust them completely, never realizing they were just as ruthless as he was. That made them the perfect weapon to turn against him. I started small, gathering client lists, digging through old contracts, and copying every piece of documentation I could access through my network. Years of working inside the business had given me knowledge of where sensitive information lived both digitally and on paper. The old filing cabinets at the downtown office still held contracts from deals my father wouldn't want anyone to see. I didn't need to break in. I still had contacts, people who owed me favors, and they were willing to pass things along discreetly. Every new document was another piece of ammunition. What I needed was a smoking gun, something that could kill the sale entirely. That's when I found whispers of an ongoing zoning investigation by the city council. It was buried deep in public records, not yet in the news, but the dots were easy to connect. The buyer had property disputes in multiple cities, and Mercer & Co. had at least 2 projects approved under questionable permits. If I could link these together and feed the right information to the right people, it wouldn't just stop the sale, it would destroy his credibility forever. That thought kept me awake, not from fear, but from anticipation. I began weaving the evidence into a clear, damning narrative: timelines, signatures, inspection failures, all leading back to him. I knew the city council would take interest if I presented it as a matter of public safety, but I didn't want to stop there. The press would eat it alive, especially once I handed over proof that the incoming buyer had an equally corrupt history. The beauty of the plan was in its simplicity. Once the truth came out, neither side could recover without dragging the other down, and I'd be the invisible hand pulling the strings. Every time I thought about my father's calm, cutting voice telling me I was getting nothing, my resolve sharpened. He had underestimated me, thinking I was just a dutiful daughter who'd fade away quietly. But I was done playing by his rules. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about dismantling the illusion of power he'd built at my expense. I didn't just want him to lose the sale. I wanted him to lose everything. He valued his reputation, his allies, and the empire he had taken from me. The pieces were in place. Now, all I had to do was strike. The weeks after my escape from the house were a blur of sleepless nights and cold coffee. Every memory of that dinner replayed in my mind: the smug look on my father's face, the casual cruelty in his voice. I carried that moment with me like a stone in my chest, fueling the quiet storm building inside me. I didn't want just survival anymore. I wanted retribution. I began mapping out my father's financial world, tracing connections, deals, and alliances. If he thought I'd crumble, he underestimated me. I wasn't the naive daughter anymore, I was the ghost in the wires. Watching, learning. I started with what I knew best, the operations. I had grown up in the shadow of his business empire, absorbing details most people overlooked. The suppliers, the secret accounts, the favors he traded under the table. Every connection was a string, and I was learning how to pull them without anyone noticing. Nights were spent combing through public records, tracing property deeds, and following the trail of shell companies. The more I uncovered, the more I saw how vulnerable his empire really was. My father's kingdom was built on glass, and I had the hammer. I played the role of the invisible daughter well. Social media silence. No direct contact. Only whispers from mutual acquaintances that I was trying to find my footing. In reality, I was building an arsenal of information. I even reached out to old employees who'd been discarded by my father without a second thought. Some were bitter enough to share damaging details, contracts forged, partnerships sabotaged, debts unpaid. Each story added weight to my weapon. My revenge wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be surgical, precise, and irreversible. It wasn't just about exposing him, it was about dismantling him from the inside. I began seeding doubt in his network, sending anonymous tips to competitors and regulators. Small enough to seem accidental, large enough to cause ripples. A shipment delayed here, a payment lost there. I watched as his once flawless operation began to stutter. He wouldn't know it was me, at least, not yet. The goal was to make him feel the ground shift under his feet before I took the final swing. Slow destruction was sweeter than instant ruin. The more cracks I made, the more his empire bled money and trust. I'd hear through whispers that my father was growing restless, snapping at his partners, calling emergency meetings. He was too proud to admit he was losing control, but I could see it happening. Every move I made tightened the noose around his legacy. My father had always preached control, but now, control was slipping through his fingers like sand. And the best part, he didn't even know who was holding the hourglass. The power he once had over me was rotting from the inside out. But revenge is a patient creature, and I wasn't ready to strike just yet. I wanted him desperate, trapped in a cage of his own making, before I revealed the truth. I started to prepare the final act, gathering the most damning evidence into a neat, lethal package. Forged signatures, falsified audits, illegal transfers, it was all there, lined up like dominoes. All I had to do was push. But the moment had to be perfect. It had to be a stage where everyone he respected would see the fall. I had a plan, and the holiday season would bring the curtain down. The lawsuit dragged on for months, but every court date was a step closer to reclaiming what was mine. My father's smug confidence began to crack when my lawyer presented bank statements showing how he had funneled business profits into his personal accounts. His face turned pale. The same man who had humiliated me at the holiday table now cornered under oath. I didn't speak to him outside of court. I wanted him to stew in the silence, the weight of knowing his own daughter was dismantling the empire he thought he controlled. Every piece of evidence was a brick in my wall of vengeance. When the verdict came, it wasn't just numbers on a page, it was a rebirth. The judge awarded me my rightful share of the business, plus damages that left my father financially wounded. The look in his eyes wasn't anger. It was something worse, fear. Fear of the daughter he underestimated. Fear of a future where he no longer had the power to dictate my life. I walked out of that courtroom with the papers in my hand, feeling the final chains of his control snap, one after the other. The holiday betrayal had been avenged. Taking over my portion of the business was a calculated move. I didn't just want money, I wanted to reshape the legacy he had poisoned. I rebranded my part, cut ties with his suppliers, and built my own loyal team. Clients who once feared my father's wrath now came to me willingly. My name replaced his in conversations. My vision outshone his in execution. Every success was a reminder to him that his decision to betray me had been the worst mistake of his life. I didn't just survive, flourished, and I made sure he watched every step of it. I knew the revenge wasn't just in the court ruling or the profits, it was in the silence that followed. The family stopped inviting him to gatherings, whispers of his downfall echoing in every room. My mother, once too afraid to speak against him, sent me a quiet text, "I'm proud of you." That was the final nail in his coffin. The man who thought family loyalty meant blind obedience had learned it could also mean blood-deep retribution. And I hadn't just taken back what was mine, I had stripped him of the only thing he couldn't buy back: respect. Years later, the holidays felt different. I hosted them in my own home now, at a table twice as long as my father's, with laughter instead of power plays. People toasted to my resilience, not his authority. I didn't need to speak his name. His absence said enough. He lived alone in a smaller house now, far from the empire he had once ruled. I never sent an invitation. My revenge wasn't about welcoming him back, it was about showing him he could never return to the place he burned down himself. Some wounds close, others stay open, so the lesson is never forgotten, and in the quiet moments, I sometimes replay that night in my head, in pain anymore, but in power. I remember the way the room went still when he announced my future was gone. I remember how my hands shook under the table, not from fear, but from the spark of defiance he lit inside me. That night, he thought he had ended my story, but all he did was write the prologue to a much greater one where I rose from the ashes of his cruelty, and made sure the world knew I didn't just get even, I got ahead.